special creation. So come take a look, give me the hook or the ovation. It's my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say, I am what I am.
Good morning, everybody. This was a last minute experiment putting the music on, and it worked. So that was I Am What I Am. So good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to another Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinar. My name is Chris Maddox. I'm one of the I'm one of the members of the steering group on the Three Nations Dementia Working Group. I'm living with dementia, and I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. Today, I am chairing the webinar along with John Hammond. And this morning's theme is LGBTQ. No, I got that wrong. LGBTQ, sorry. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, I think, but John will put us right in a minute. I would like to remind you that these webinars are designed and produced and presented by people living with dementia. We have a varied panel, including guest speakers. And today our panel consists of myself. I'm a person living with dementia. I was diagnosed in 2016 with early onset vascular dementia. Then in 2018 diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And in 2021, I was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. And John Hammond is with us, who's co-chairing with myself. John is a PhD student at Brighton and Sussex Medical School. His research uses photography for LGBTQ people to explore their lived experiences. He also works in the community supporting LGBTQ people with dementia across Sussex. John was a volunteer for Alzheimer's Society for almost 10 years. Then we also have with us Louise Bates. Louise chairs the Alzheimer's Society LGBTQ+ network and is the communities and volunteering lead for the East of England, working to engage undeserved communities in dementia awareness and support. Louise is an out and proud bisexual woman. We also have with us Basil Barron. Basil is an involvement assistant working within the involvement team at Alzheimer's Society, who is passionate about making the world a more inclusive place for everyone. His pronouns are he and him, and he is a transgender man. We will be monitoring the chat box for questions and any questions that you may have. And we've got our people behind the scenes sorting all that out. We're all here to help to make the webinars a success. And the webinars rely on you. We need your comments, responses and questions via the text box you will find at the bottom of your screen. We can't see you all, but you can see us. If you raise your hand, we won't be able to see you. So please put anything you want to ask in the chat box. Well, that's enough from me. So I'm going to hand over to my co-presenter, John Hammond. Good morning, John. Over to you.
Morning, Chris. What a privilege to join you on this webinar today. So we are going to focus on, as you said rightly, Chris, LGBTQ plus and the lives of those LGBTQ plus people who might be living with dementia. We're going to have a whistle-stop tour in my section of around 10 minutes, and we'll begin, next slide, please, with just reinforcing and some terms. So the terms LGBT. So lesbian, these terms are from the Stonewall website. So the web address is at the bottom of the page. I would encourage our viewers, listeners to go to the Stonewall website. There's a huge glossary of LGBTQ terms there. And these are just kind of scratching the surface of LGBTQ terminology. So just to remind and reinforce, lesbian, a woman who has romantic or sexual orientation towards women. Gay, a man who has a romantic or sexual orientation towards men, but also a generic term for lesbian and gay sexuality. Bisexual, an umbrella term that encompasses and describes romantic and sexual orientation towards more than one gender. And many other descriptions may be used, for example, pansexual, queer, etc. And trans as an umbrella term to describe people whose gender is not the same as or does not sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. Other self-descriptions may include genderqueer, gender fluid, non-binary, gender variant, etc. And again, go to the Stonewall website to find out more. Importantly, the term queer remains something that many people find a difficult term. It is a term that's used by people who want to reject specific labels of sexual orientation or gender identity, and also a way of rejecting norms within LGBTQ communities such as racism, sizeism, and ableism. Historically, queer as a word has been used as a slur and is still viewed as such by some LGBT people. I tend to use the word interchangeably, so if I use it today, it's in no way intended to offend. I'm happy to describe myself as queer, and for LGBT people, many have reclaimed the word queer and use it today to self-identify. Next slide, please. So we cannot possibly understand LGBTQ lives without looking at history. And we must understand some of the important social and political events that have shaped LGBTQ plus lives. On the back of LGBTQ History Month in February, we can go all the way back to the 19th century to 1867 to remember Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, who was a German lawyer and writer, and is today celebrated as one of the early voices of the gay liberation movement, which began all those years ago in the 19th century. Karl believed that same-sex attraction was natural and campaigned to decriminalize homosexuality in Germany. He was at the forefront of the gay liberation movement. As we jump forward 100 years to 1967, it was only in 1967 that sex between two men was partially decriminalized. And that was in England. The same didn't happen in Scotland until 1980 and in Northern Ireland until 1982. In 1988, Section 28 of the Local Government Act was introduced, and it forbade the teaching of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship, in the words of the Act. And this piece of legislation stayed in force until 2003. It meant that people who worked in public authority institutions such as schools could not talk about homosexuality in any way to pupils. In 1992, the World Health Organization declassified same-sex attraction as a mental illness. And only in 2018 did the World Health Organization declassify trans identities as a mental illness. Age of consent, I'm going to add some things to this timeline. So the age of consent was lowered to 16 in 2006. First civil partnerships for same-sex couples began in 2005, and same-sex marriage was only introduced in 2014. And importantly, the other elements on this timeline, the Gender Recognition Act was introduced in 2004, giving trans people legal recognition of their gender. And in 2010, the Equality Act came into being and includes gender reassignment as a protected characteristic. So we can see in this timeline, this very potted history of timeline, the social and political events that have informed LGBTQ lives, that have criminalized LGBTQ lives and pathologized LGBTQ plus lives. So where does that leave us in 2025? Undoubtedly, social attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people have changed, and we see some legal protections in place now. However, the Office of National Statistics reports that hate crimes committed specifically toward trans people, for example, have increased by 11% between 22 and 23. And research shows that societal attitudes towards trans people continue to be less favorable than those towards cisgender, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Conversion therapy practices, which are pseudo-scientific practices often involving talking, prayer, physical violence, aimed at suppressing trans identities, remain legal today. And much research continues to highlight that many LGBTQ plus people will avoid health and social care services due to fear of prejudice or discrimination. This may be at times when those health and social care services are of most need. Next slide, please. Very importantly, we must consider, I guess, the implications of dementia on memory loss, the kind of symptoms of memory loss on LGBTQ plus lives. So some key factors that we might want to consider: a person living with dementia may not remember who they have told about their sexual orientation and gender identity. So that might mean that they jeopardize, I guess, coming out to services when they may or may not wish to, or coming out to individuals when they may or may not wish to. People may forget to take hormones, for example, or other gender-affirming treatments, and also other medical treatments that might be needed for other comorbid conditions, for example, HIV. People may, in their symptoms of memory loss, go back in time, revert to an earlier time, which could be a time of trauma for older LGBTQ plus people, as we saw in the timeline. And of course, memory loss may affect an individual's autonomy and agency, which may be jeopardized and affect their interactions with health and social care to interact on their terms with those services. And I think very importantly at this point, it's really essential that we understand that not all LGBTQ people experience life in exactly the same way. We must consider as well the effect of ethnicity, age, economic status, for example, financial situation, educational attainment, all of which will also play into the experiences of LGBTQ plus people. Next slide, please. And some further considerations, I guess, what it means, I guess, for LGBTQ plus carers and their support networks. We see sometimes, for example, this idea of partner rejection, where somebody may, who is living with more advanced symptoms of dementia, for example, reject somebody who's been a partner, a life partner, because maybe they don't recognize or remember them as having that status in their lives. People also maybe reject, in inverted commas, their partner who may be living in formal care services, residential care, for example, for fear of their loved one receiving more prejudiced or discriminating treatment. There may be this idea of having to come out on loop. So somebody living with dementia, for example, coming out on loop to different services, or carers, for example, explaining their LGBTQ relationships to services repeatedly, or somebody coming out to their loved one who's forgotten about their relationship with them and coming out to them over and over again. Research shows that LGBTQ plus children are more likely than non-LGBTQ plus people to act as carers for family members. We understand through research and experiences that sometimes LGBTQ plus people are ejected or rejected by their families of origin, who may not actually know much about their lives or their identities. And that sometimes means that as decision-making capabilities become diminished in somebody living with dementia, estranged family members may re-enter their lives and may make decisions or may want to make decisions about their health and care needs that are not affirmative of their LGBTQ plus identities. There's a consideration about religion, faith, and culture, which may present additional risks of exclusion. And we know that LGBTQ plus people are more likely to live alone, are more likely to live without children, and therefore probably more likely to rely on formal care and health and social care services. And we do know that LGBTQ plus people have often rely on a family of choice. So a rainbow family, a family of people who may be a mixture of birth family and other chosen people, loved ones who provide valuable community support. Next slide, please. And so just a final slide to think about the importance of future planning. So future planning is important for all of us, anybody who's living with dementia and those with chronic health conditions. But it means that for LGBTQ plus people, future planning may be important where the specific wishes and requirements of those individuals can be stated in advance. So advanced decisions allow one to refuse specific medical treatments in particular circumstances and apply when one doesn't have mental capacity to make that decision. It ensures you do not receive treatment that you do not wish to receive. Advanced statements are an expression of wishes for the future. They help people to understand your personal values and beliefs. They're not legally binding, but must be considered when others decide what's in a person's best interests. And lasting powers of attorney let you choose people to make decisions for you when you do not have capacity. There are two types of lasting powers of attorney: property and finance, and health and welfare. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over now to Chris. So Chris, just handing over to you for the next few minutes to think about some reflections, I guess, on those experiences that LGBTQ, those important social and political events that have informed LGBTQ plus lives, and your reflections on maybe what that's meant for you in your life.
I think you covered it all very well, John. And I think that people have said to me, why is it that LGBTQ plus people living with dementia are different to people just living with dementia? And I think their needs can be very different. And I can remember a transgender man talking to me and saying that he needed to take medication every day, hormone treatment. And he said, what happens when I forget to take that treatment? Because I need it. And he also said that he was 50 and he decided he'd go and visit some local care homes where he lived to see what they were like towards LGBTQ plus people. He went to 10 care homes. Of the 10, 8 of them wouldn't take him because he was under the age of 65. So the other 2 that were left said, well, you know, we would take you, but the average age of our care home is 82. So he was shocked at that, and so am I, to be honest with you. And I didn't realize that there was this age 65 quota thing on many of the care homes. And I'm not sure what the legalities of it is, but it is there. And the 2 care homes that said that they would take him, said, we do the best we can. We treat everybody like we treat you like we do everybody else. But that's not always good enough for LGBTQ plus people. And I'll briefly share another true experience that was shared to me, is that there was a transgender woman in a care home, and her birth parents came in and said to the staff, this is not our daughter, Jane, this is our son, John. You will not dress him in women's clothes, you'll dress him in men's clothes. And left, you know, in a rage, really. So how are they supposed to look after the transgender woman when the birth parents came in performing like that. So these are the sorts of issues that people can be faced with. And
Yeah,
I want to leave time for everybody else. So if there's
of
any
course.
time at the end, I'll come back in. But I just wanted to give those examples, and that's happening today.
Perfect. And I know, Chris, that your life experience, like many of us on screen, we've experienced discrimination and prejudice just on the basis of our sexual orientation or gender identity.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
they're really important points. And as you said, treating everybody the same often means treating everybody as cisgendered and heterosexual. So that's the starting point. But actually, if without a cure for dementia, we rely on the quality of life, don't we, for all? And that quality of life often requires specific, treatments, I guess, and specific understanding of the differences of what it means to live as LGBTQ plus people. And as you said, those intersections of age and all of those things as well. We're very complex individuals, aren't we? All of us. So thank you, Chris. I'm gonna head over to Lou. So Lou, just thinking about the future, I liked in the timeline as we move forwards, like importantly, I think what I didn't highlight is as we advance with our societal attitudes and legal protections, they're also at threat of being taken away. So we continue to work hard, don't we? We stand on the shoulders of those who've come before us, the Karl, Heinrich, Ulrichs individuals, and many, many, many people who've allowed us to have the voices that we have today. So we give thanks to all of those people. And I know Alzheimer's Society, through terrific people like yourself, are doing wonderful work with LGBTQ people who are affected by and living with dementia. So tell me a bit more about that, Lou, please.
Thanks, John. So yes, absolutely. It's a really interesting political climate at the moment, and we are always very mindful as a community that the hard-won rights that we have can be so easily undone. And that's why awareness raising is so important. So thank you very much for having me. I'm Louise, otherwise known as Lou. I am co-chair of the LGBTQ plus staff network at Alzheimer's Society, and I also work with the community in my role at Alzheimer's Society. So I just want to touch on a couple of things that we're doing. So I'm going to first talk about the Alzheimer's Society LGBTQ plus staff network. This is a space for LGBTQ plus staff to come together, not to just to connect socially, but to also work progressively towards continually improving inclusion for LGBTQ plus people at Alzheimer's Society, both as staff and externally as well in terms of our service users coming in. So some of the types of activities we do is we coordinate and support local teams getting out to their local Pride events across the country through Pride season, which runs kind of late May through to September. So last year we attended over 30 Pride events nationally, and these are excellent spaces for us to be able to really engage with the community and to talk to people and offer tailored advice, guidance and support. Just reflecting on the slides you shared earlier, John, there was talking about carers' support needs. I spoke to a gentleman who was a gay man and was supporting his mother who had advanced Alzheimer's. And he was explaining to me that every time he goes to visit his mum, in order to explain the presence of his husband in his life, he's having to come out over and over and over again to his mum, who sadly has moved in her mind further back down that timeline and is no longer able to accept his LGBTQ plus status with the same warmth and grace that she once did, and how that is becoming increasingly challenging for him as a carer. We also support with the creation of LGBTQ plus promotional materials. So that might be getting email signature banners created for staff for things like History Month, for Pride, looking at working with our marketing team to ensure that our campaigns are inclusive so that we do see representation of LGBTQ plus people, really, really important. We work with our social media team to get stories out and again to raise awareness of LGBTQ plus lived experience of dementia. So we've had 2 fantastic pieces go out in February for History Month that you'll find on our social media platforms. Please do feel free to check those out and give them a like. We also support staff with raising awareness and education around LGBTQ plus lives and experiences, because the more awareness and understanding our staff have, then the better the support is we can offer to people when they arrive at our services. And recently we recorded a section on LGBTQ plus lives and how the dementia journey may look different, to be included within a cultural awareness e-learning module that's available now to all staff within our organisation, which is fantastic. And we also serve as a network, as a soundboard for the organisation. So lots of different people with lots of different projects will come to us and they will ask for us to maybe review a document to check, is the language in this document inclusive or within this publication? Or if we're looking at something like an early interventions project, then actually what are the needs of LGBTQ plus people within this really specific part of the dementia experience? So we can also offer a little bit of soundboarding there as well. Now, in my role, I'm a local communities and volunteering lead for the East of England, which means I work across the region with underrepresented communities, supporting engagement and supporting bringing people into service who need our support. So some of the things that I've been doing around LGBTQ plus and dementia, I have been on local radio stations talking LGBTQ plus and dementia. A fantastic session actually on Decorum Radio in Hertfordshire with a gender diverse presenter as well. So that was a really lovely conversation. I've also been talking to the LGBTQ plus staff networks of our corporate partners. So where we are the charity of the year for some corporate organisations, then often those organisations have LGBTQ plus staff networks, and it's a great opportunity for us to link in again to reach members of the community to share that awareness, advice and guidance. I've also been working in partnership with local LGBTQ plus community groups and organisations to deliver learning opportunities and events. So to give you some examples of things that are in the works at the moment, I'm working with Proud Watford, Hearts Pride, Dementia Friendly Watford and Watford Football Club to run an event specifically focused on LGBTQ plus and dementia, which will be hosted at the football club. So that's coming up. And then I'm also working with organisations like Q Alliance, which is an LGBTQ plus charity and organisation in Milton Keynes, and working with them and Health Watch to support including LGBTQ plus and dementia awareness within educational days for social care staff within the area. So there's lots of ways that we're getting out, we're connecting with the community and supporting education to be raised. I'm currently running a survey with trans plus and or non-binary people, starting to get an understanding of what are their either lived experiences in relation to dementia or concerns for the future if they were to receive a diagnosis in the future. And that's bringing up some really interesting conversation around things like continuing access to gender affirming healthcare. So that's bringing up some really interesting conversation that I'm hoping to explore further. And we also at Alzheimer's Society are sharing the opportunity for people and service users and staff to get involved in LGBTQ plus focused research projects within the dementia field as well. So there's a lot going on. And I think I could talk for days, so I'll stop there, but that's a nice little kind of summary of some of the pieces I've been involved with at Alzheimer's Society.
Lou, thank you so much. It shows, I think, that often within organizations, passionate individuals make those organizations, they spearhead and they galvanize and they direct, very positive work towards ever inclusive practice, I think. I used to be part of the LGBTQ plus staff and volunteer network, and I was always struck by it being a very safe space, because some of the people who came to the network, staff members, for example, weren't open about weren't able to be open about their sexual or gender identities within the immediate teams in which they worked, for example. And the network provided a very safe space for people to kind of commune. And I guess one of the takeaways from today is the importance, I guess, of community and communities, I guess, and finding those spaces where we feel safe and able to be authentically who we are. Within the workplace and in broader society, you know, like the value and the importance of that. I don't know if you want to. That struck me as an important kind of element of the network.
Absolutely. And since then, we've actually published coming out at work guidance, both for staff and managers, to support some of those conversations for people who previously may not have felt. And often this isn't necessarily a result of the work environment. It may be more of a result of negative experiences of prejudice that someone has carried through their life. And it's down to every individual as to whether or not they wish to disclose their LGBTQ plus status. Obviously it's not mandatory. But I think belonging is really important, and I think it's about representation and knowing that there are people out there who understand. There are people who understand your lived history, your lived experience, and what the implications of that mean in your everyday life. And, you know, particularly in our line of work, where the lived experience of dementia is so heavily informed by a person's personal history. So, yes.
Absolutely. Key takeaway, I think, from today, you know, our life stories are to be celebrated in every shape and form. And on that note, I'm going to bring in, while I'm mindful of time as well, I'm going to bring in Basil as well to our discussion. So Basil, tell us a bit more about you.
So I'm Basil. It's really lovely to be here today, actually, very exciting. I'm part of the community as a transgender man. I've been with society in the involvement team for about 6 months now, really loving it. And I'm also really loving being part of the LGBTQ network. I find that having that space to kind of come to and meet with like-minded people who understand exactly what my experiences are like is really, really, you know, it's lovely. It's such a nice thing to know that there is that community there and that everyone is so supportive and understanding and sweet. Really do enjoy being a part of the network. Can't rate it enough, to be honest.
Brilliant. And tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at the moment as well. What's the important part in your involvement work?
So I'm very passionate about inclusion. It's something that I really do, you know, want to make a difference in terms of. In my role, I've been doing a few different inclusion-related projects, some to do with the LGBTQ community and some to do with other communities who are underserved in society in general. But in terms of my LGBTQ work, I've currently been working on some resources to help LGBT people be understood better by those who aren't as familiar with the community, help people be really equipped with the language, the vocabulary, and what they need to confidently have discussions about LGBTQ topics. I found that a lot of the time it's not to do with kind of prejudice for a lot of people. It's just fear of not knowing what to say or saying the right thing. I think people can, when they're not as familiar with the community, be unsure of the right words to use. So I'm really keen to help equip people to know what language to use, feel confident having those discussions, and know that it's, you know, it's not a problem. We want to help. And everyone's, you know, we're all learning, really.
That's a valuable point, isn't it? We're all learning. We're learning together. We kind of we advance together. We evolve together. We learn together. We work in partnerships as well. Lou, you were talking about the value of partnership working. Tell me more, please, Lou, about your work with trans plus and gender diverse communities, and perhaps we can discuss that together between us.
Yes. So actually, Basil supported me in putting together the survey. Along with a couple of gender diverse individuals in the community that I have made connections with. So I have a survey out at the moment, and it's particularly looking at either lived experience of dementia or concerns for the future if people were to develop dementia. And there's really interesting narrative coming through. There is a lot of narrative around health and social care institutions and services not being equipped to support trans plus and or non-binary people. There is a narrative around already feeling like you have to prove your capacity in medical settings without a dementia diagnosis in order to evidence your gender identity. And people saying things like, I feel like I already have to prove my mental capacity so that I have access to gender affirming care as it is. And what would the implication then be if I were to develop dementia? Would a medical professional then say I no longer have capacity to determine my gender? And even if I've been on hormone therapy or I've gone through various gender affirming healthcares or surgeries, would they then actually revoke my access to gender affirming care on the basis of mental capacity? Someone saying, I feel like I have to be my GP's healthiest patient at all times. And there's also very sadly a narrative of trans plus people don't expect to live long enough for dementia, which we know in wider society is perceived as an older person's condition. Even though we know it's not exclusive to older people, we do see higher prevalence in older age brackets, but a lot of people don't actually perceive themselves to maybe live that long. And therefore future planning is not a particularly high priority on their list. And I think it's a very sad narrative. And I think we are now seeing for the first time the first generation of older transgender people coming through in terms of healthcare and the healthcare system and social care. And it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I would just say to anyone who is watching this webinar, if you do come to Alzheimer's Society for support, I would really, really encourage you to advocate your LGBTQ+ status when you make contact with us, because that way we can ensure that we are truly providing you with person-centered care and support, and we can refer you to the right resources and to the right activities that are going to be the most beneficial for you.
Thank you, Lou. I'm going to just make one point and then I'm going to ask Chris. So one point is I was reflecting on the introduction song, I Am What I Am. And I have encountered, very fortunately in my life, people that have also received their dementia diagnosis and then decided, do you know what, this is liberating. I'm going to do exactly whatever I want and be whoever I want, and the person I've always wanted to be, I will now be for the remaining rest of my rest of my life. You know, so I'm struck by that. Chris.
Yeah, just a couple of points that have come to me since we've been talking. Is that people living with dementia, as the dementia progresses, they will regress to a different, an earlier part of their life. And it might be a case where a gay man will regress to a time when being a gay man was a criminal offence. And so won't talk about that or won't say anything because they think they might be arrested. Or it could be that a transgender person who has maybe had surgery will regress to a time when they were the sex that they were born and not the sex that they identify as now. And these are important things to remember because very often people will transgress to a time that maybe wasn't a good time in their life. And so it's worth bearing these things in mind when you're talking to LGBTQ+ people. And I haven't slipped up with the initials yet, but I'm going to slip up soon. I know I am. So just just those things I wanted to highlight, that when people regress, they can regress back to a time that they can only remember that time and nothing from today.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
And reminiscence is an incredibly powerful tool, isn't
Yeah.
it, for us all? We want to often one wants to remember their life and pick out all of those happy memories, and some of those are punctuated, I guess, by very difficult times for minoritized communities like LGBTQ plus people. And so it's important, isn't it, with people who are working alongside LGBTQ plus people and maybe practicing reminiscence practices or services, to be mindful of that as well, isn't it? To think about, you know, school life or work life or family life may not be the happy memories that we all would hope to share. But so I'm going to come back. Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, and then of course you've got people who are in total denial that they have dementia. I cared for a friend of mine at the end of last year who had Alzheimer's, and you could not mention the word dementia in front of her because she did not have dementia.
Yeah.
So we had to be very careful when we were choosing language. And I used to say to her, "Oh, you know those times when sometimes you forget." But she was in total denial that she had dementia. So you've got to find out where that person is and what they'll accept and what they won't accept. And I had to do things like hide her car keys because the DVLA wouldn't let her drive anymore, and talk our way around things. And I can remember my dad, he had Alzheimer's as well. And I went to visit him one day and he said, "Chris," he said, all of my ornaments need to come down." He loved owls, and in his lounge he had loads of owl ornaments. So I said, "Why is that, Dad?" He said, "Well, they're all having sex in front of me." And I didn't say to him, "No, they're not, don't be so silly." I just took down the owl ornaments and he was happy with that. So sometimes I would say never try to argue with somebody living with dementia, and just try to either change the conversation or, you know, divert the conversation. But yeah, back to you, John.
Thank you. I think you just said get to know the person, you know, like, isn't that true? You know, like get to know somebody, ask questions, be inquisitive, celebrate their lives. You know, like that's really important, isn't it? Lou, and then I'm going to go to Basil. Lou.
Thanks. Yeah, just while we're talking on the topic of kind of reminiscence, there are lots of LGBTQ plus organisations that are doing history focused work and projects. So I know, for example, in Norfolk, there's a fantastic archive project that's running, that's collecting paraphernalia and memorabilia from kind of across several decades of LGBTQ plus history. So I would encourage people to seek out these projects and organisations who may be able to support in delivering tailored reminiscence activity.
Absolutely. And several organisations have their collections online now increasingly as well, don't they? So they're easier to access through the website. Brighton and Hove LGBTQ Switchboard keeps all of their archive in an organisation called The Keep, and they can go there and pull out things that are, you know, like old memorabilia from the helpline and things, so where people used to call in and stuff. And so very important tools, I guess, like you say, that are culturally appropriate to individuals. If you're going to engage with memory and reminiscence work, I guess that's a really important takeaway, Lou, isn't it? Basil, tell us more about, we're kind of fast approaching, aren't we? Moving through time, so we're fast approaching. Tell us about some more about your work. So tell us about the signposting and learnings that we can take forward from you.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'd love to. And yeah, just a quick little bit from me, a bit of signposting, a little bit of tips and tricks that I'd love to kind of impress on everyone. And yeah, a few key takeaways for today. And then if we've got time, we'll go through a couple of questions in the chat. But yeah, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today and for being here. It really is a pleasure. I'm Basil. My pronouns are he, him, and I work for the Alzheimer's Society. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about my work. As part of my work, I've led a project focused specifically on LGBTQ inclusion, creating a set of 4 resources for our staff and for our volunteers, as well as for our Dementia Voice partners, who are people with lived experience who we work with. The goal of these is to equip people with the information that they need to make LGBTQ focused conversations feel a little easier to navigate. This project involved me gaining insights from LGBTQ people with dementia, as well as those who don't have it, as well as staff who are members of the community, carers, as well as people who are not LGBTQ, but want to kind of better understand the community. I did this to ensure that the information we are providing is as comprehensive, inclusive, accessible, and as accurate as possible. As someone who is transgender, this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I understand that it's also a topic that can feel quite overwhelming, especially if you're not familiar with the terminology, or you're worried about saying the wrong thing or knowing the right words to say. I'd like to discuss some advice about navigating these discussions and touch upon a little of the content in our Alzheimer's Society internal resources on inclusion and involvement. Our goal is to promote dementia-friendly spaces that are kind, friendly, and inclusive to all of us, whether we are straight, gay, bisexual, transgender, or identify in a different way. First of all, mistakes are okay, and it's what we do next that matters the most. None of us are going to get everything right 100% of the time, no matter what. We're all learning every day. Language matters, but it's okay to get it wrong sometimes. One of the biggest worries that people have approached me with from those who are outside or not familiar with the community is fear of saying the wrong thing or accidentally offending somebody. A lot of people ask me, what if I use the wrong word or say the wrong thing? And the answer to that is that that's okay. Nobody expects you to be perfect or to know everything. If you do get something wrong, for example, using the wrong pronoun for somebody, or assuming that somebody's partner is a man when they are a woman, for example, all you need to do is correct yourself, move on, and try and do better next time. There's no real need for a big apology or to tell them how bad you feel about your mistake. Dwelling on it can make everyone feel uncomfortable, including yourself. The best approach is to simply correct quickly and move on, because it's really not that big of a deal. So one example of this is if you call somebody the wrong pronoun. For example, you're speaking to somebody who uses they pronouns and you accidentally call them he or she. You might have the instinct to be to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I feel awful. I didn't mean to offend you, etc. But this can just make the other person feel guilty too, or like they're supposed to comfort you. Instead, it's much better and much easier to simply correct yourself and move on. Say something like, sorry, I meant they, and then continue with this conversation. Most of us already do this in other situations. For example, I'm sure we've all gotten somebody's name wrong before. In discussions, people with dementia have sometimes fed back to me that new pronouns can be challenging to adapt to, and that is completely understandable. Dementia affects everyone in different ways, and sometimes new concepts, especially ones that have changed or evolved recently, can be harder to get your head around. That's okay. Language evolves and changes over time. For example, transsexual used to be the term to describe somebody whose gender identity is different from the gender that they were assigned at birth. But this term can now be considered offensive to a lot of us. That said, some transgender people, particularly older transgender people, may prefer this term, and that should be respected too. But today, the word transgender is what we find more accurate and more appropriate to refer to us as. Most people in the LGBTQ community understand and believe that what matters most is kindness and effort. If someone struggles to use or remember the right words or pronoun to use, the best thing that we can do is just focus on trying your best and making others feel respected. At the end of the day, we're not expecting perfection. It's just about being considerate and open to learning. Another thing that I'd really like to flag is that it's okay to ask questions. Just be mindful of the questions that you ask. Just think to yourself, would I be comfortable answering this? I'd also like to give a few tips to bring this kind of information about LGBT people and communities into everyday life. Sometimes it can be hard to know where to start in order to be more inclusive. So I'd like to go over a few everyday things that can help create a more welcoming environment, wherever or whoever you are. You don't have to move mountains or spend money to make positive change. So first of all, about inclusive language. It can be easy to make assumptions, and it's about unlearning that, which can be challenging, but it can make the world a better place for everyone. So for example, instead of using the term or assuming that somebody has a husband or wife, girlfriend or boyfriend, you can use the term partner. And instead of opening a speech with ladies and gentlemen, just saying hello everyone can be much more inclusive. Secondly, if somebody shares their pronouns or a name that they'd like to be referred to as, do your best to use them. If you're unsure, you can ask them privately, how would you prefer to be referred to? Next of all, leading by example is a great way to show allyship and show that people are safe with you, and it avoids singling people out, which can be uncomfortable and at times unsafe. You can signal that you are a safe person in a variety of ways. One example is you can put your pronouns into your name box or your email signature in virtual spaces. And this can help people be confident in how they should refer to you, but also to hopefully feel comfortable doing the same. It is, of course, entirely up to you whether to do this, but I'd really recommend it if you are open to do so, as it can help you signal to others that they are safe with you. You can also let people know verbally when you introduce yourself to them by saying, hello, my pronouns are he, him, for example. Normalizing talking about pronouns can help people feel safe with you. And it's also really important that we shut down any homophobic behavior in the world that we see, and also be mindful of confidentiality. Never share somebody else's LGBTQ identity unless you know 100% that it is okay with them and that you're not putting them into danger. I think it's important to note that not every person who is part of the LGBTQ community is going to tell you that, and that you can't assume by looking at someone how they may identify. Some people may not choose to disclose their gender or sexuality because they don't feel safe, because they just don't want to talk about it, or because they don't think it's relevant to the conversation. They might consider it very personal, or you might not know that they are LGBTQ, for example, because they are in a straight passing relationship. And by this, I mean, for example, a bisexual woman who is married to a man. It also just might not be relevant to the conversation at hand. And it may be the case that the person is questioning or not sure about their identity. For this reason, it's really important that we use this inclusive approach and spirit when we're talking to anybody. So my final thoughts are that whether it's a workplace community group or just small day-to-day actions, we can do little things to make LGBTQ people feel safe and comfortable. A world that is better for LGBTQ people is a world that's better for everyone. My key takeaway I want to leave you all with today is this. You don't have to be an expert to be an ally. Inclusion is about small actions that show respect and make the people around you feel valued and safe. LGBTQ rights are human rights. Be kind to yourself as you learn. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and remember that mistakes really aren't the end of the world. In fact, they help us to understand and grow and know about the world better. The best and easiest thing you can do for LGBTQ inclusion is to simply be kind and respectful for everyone you meet and to have an open mind. If you need any dementia support, whether for yourself or for your loved one, LGBTQ or not, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Alzheimer's Society. You can call us at 0333 150 3456. Or you can use our online forum at forum.alzheimers.org.uk. On this forum, we have resources and advice for people with dementia and their families, including a section dedicated specifically to LGBTQ people. Thank you for listening and for your time today.
Thank you, Basil. That's wonderful, and lots of top tips there for people to take away, which is a really important thing, I think, for our message today from this webinar. I noticed there are a few questions. We've got 2 or 3 minutes, maybe, just to answer any particularly pertinent questions. Lou, have you got anything in there? I know you've been responding. I've seen you kind of responding as I've been going on. I've been trying to keep an eye
on the keyboard.
You have.
We just need to be mindful that the people on the webinar can't see any of the questions, so we'll have to tell them what they are as well.
Okay.
Yes. So if I just really quickly answer a couple of two questions that I've answered in chat. So one person was just asking clarity on why LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be carers, and in many cases that's often because LGBTQ plus people are less likely to have children and are therefore often seen by siblings as therefore having the default capacity to be able to care for a parent. So that was just answering that question. And then there was a Dementia Friends ambassador who was asking about whether there are any resources to support adapting a Dementia Friends session for an LGBTQ plus audience. And I've just signposted them to the Alzheimer's Society Instagram page, where I recently, for LGBTQ plus History Month, adapted the first part of the bookcase analogy, and there's a video there. But if anyone is interested in kind of some further top tips, feel free to reach out. I've popped my email into the chat, and we can work with the Dementia Friends team to see what little tweaks we can make to make it dementia LGBTQ plus focused. There are some questions around how many people living with dementia are there who are LGBTQ plus? I don't know, John, if you want to pick up on that.
Well, isn't that $1 million question? I think it's big, and a part of the problem is we don't know. Services don't routinely gather the data. And I know, Lou, you were encouraging people when they come forward to Alzheimer's Society, if they feel able to, and to kind of disclose their sexual orientation or gender identity. But institutions, organizations don't routinely gather that data. So we don't have accurate numbers of LGBTQ plus people in the country anyway. And then we don't have accurate numbers within specific services, for example, dementia care services or health and social care services. So, I mean, we work on the basis that between 5 and 10% of the country are identified in some way as LGBTQ plus. I think that's quite a kind of conservative estimate. And then we have pockets, don't we, of more dense population of LGBTQ plus people in the country. So, for example, in Brighton, in the ward, in Kemptown ward, 1 in 4 people identify as LGBTQ in some way. And so undoubtedly there will be a more dense population of LGBTQ plus people living with dementia in those spaces, in those geographical locations as well. So it remains the internal kind of like how do we kind of quantify this number? But if we work on that basis, 5 to 10% of the population of LGBTQ plus, and then a certain percentage of that percentage will be people living with dementia as well. So.
Absolutely. And I think also when we think about forward thinking and future proofing for services as well, studies are now showing that an increasing number of younger people are identifying. So we're actually seeing closer to around 20% of, particularly kind of millennial down Gen Z, that are now openly identifying as being LGBTQ plus. So I think when we're thinking about future proofing our services as well, this is really, really important.
Yeah. And I think somebody's asked a kind of more specific question. So I think my understanding is around 1% of the population identify as LGBT who are aged above 70. So as we know, dementia affects, predominantly people over the age of 65. Then 1% of those people are undoubtedly at higher risk, I guess, of LGBTQ plus, of dementia in LGBTQ plus communities.
Absolutely. And if anyone's interested, if you go onto the Office of National Statistics website, there are reports you can run that will show you at least of those who answered on the census. And again, we have to be really mindful, older generations are less likely to be out. But that you can then run reports according to census that will show you in an area the LGBTQ plus population, and then you can break that down by age demographic as well. So if anyone is interested in doing a deep data dive, then the options are there. There's another question around, are there care homes in the UK dedicated to the LGBTQ plus community? Now, I know of Tonic House in London, and I've been very fortunate to visit them and to speak to their residents. I didn't know if anyone else knew of any others.
I know there are plans for an LGBTQ plus affirmative housing scheme in Manchester. I still hope for the day that Brighton will also spearhead kind of residential care for LGBTQ plus people, because like I said, there's the kind of higher, denser population of LGBTQ plus people, but it's a remaining need, I think, as an option, I guess, for people to access in the future. Now, I'm mindful of time, Chris. We have a minute to go. Over to you for the final words. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you so much. Well, I think it's been a wonderful session. I hope all of the audience has enjoyed it. And my thanks to you all for participating, and to the panelists who presented this morning. Please, if you have a theme that you would like us to consider to have a webinar on, or you would like to be a panelist on the webinar, please get in touch with the Three Nations Dementia Working Group. Can I remind you before we go that the next webinar is on Tuesday, the 15th of April, and the subject matter is positivity with dementia. So how can we live positively with dementia? And it's been wonderful to see you. And I just want to say, be kind and smile, because these things cost nothing but mean an awful lot. So it's goodbye from us. Please stay safe and well, and good wishes from us all. And if the panelists would stay on after the close of the webinar, we can have a brief chat. But thank you so much. And also the the webinar will be available. We have a Three Nations YouTube channel, and all of our webinars are available on there. So thank you very much for joining us today, and take care. Bye for now.